Hey everybody. As you can see, I'm coming at you live from the shower, front row seats. Um, man, I was like really conflicted. I made this video yesterday and it, I had to delete it. I just had to delete it. I couldn't post it. I couldn't bring myself to do it. And it's always like, I know that if you know something and if you see something, you just have to speak it. You have to like speak your truth, and that almost like feels cliche to sound, but you do have to speak it. But at the same time, I just do not want to contribute to one more person that's just like, oh, look at that. There's a problem. Somebody should do something. I don't want to just be one more person that's bitching about something, and that's the extent of it. I don't want to be just contributing hate and ugliness and negativity. I really want to be just this amazing woman that I know. I finally know since I've gotten sober. I'm like, I have the opportunity to be somebody that's pretty awesome, and to really like be my little part of a contribution to something better. I want to be part of the change. I don't want to be part of just propping up the status quo with hate and ugliness and division and just bitching about stuff, or but at the same time, I don't want to be just contributing to the continuing maintaining the status quo and things as they are by being silent and by suppressing myself. So it's like a fine line, but I know I don't want to get political, and even like being kind of apolitical is almost like making a statement. And I don't want to just be, I don't know, like a vessel for like lower level emotions. I don't want to do that. And so I ended up deleting it, because that's just not the direction I want to go in. But at the same time, I just want to like scream like to myself, because it's taken me so long to see certain things. So I'm going to tell a story about the first time that I experienced hillbilly heroin. And I'm not even talking about the first time I did Oxy. Oxy 80 was like the hillbilly heroin of, 15 years ago. And, but the first time that I actually took opiates in pill form, in pharmaceutical form, that's what I'm going to talk about, that first high. And, this was in roughly approximately, give or take, it was in 2000 and late 2007 or 2008. um and at the time I was on probation. I didn't really, I had these consequences from addiction. I had these consequences from unchecked mental illness, from addiction, from self-loathing, from codependency, from just a lifetime and a head full of unchecked chaos and destruction and self-loathing that I did not know how to check, remedy, or deal with. Right. So I had those consequences, and there were pills everywhere. This is Southern West Virginia, like coal country, which ended up being ground zero of the opioid epidemic. But at the time, you don't think, oh man, I'm just getting going in my addiction. It's going to get a lot worse, but it's already, I'm already kind of in the thick of addiction. You don't think about that. You just think, man, I feel like shit. There's no place for me in the world. Here's something that makes it feel better. And I sure as hell, nobody thought, oh wow, this is this is going to be a historic, an infamous moment in time when it comes to U.S. addiction, because there's going to be this thing called the opioid epidemic, and there's going to be lawsuits in the future, and pharmaceutical companies that are going to have to pay up for the God just immeasurable amount of lives and destruction and damage they have caused. That's going to be like in court documents on the record one day. You don't think about that. It's just like, oh, okay, yeah, this is those oxys, this is those cheap pills, this is the pills everybody's talking about. um so hindsight really is 2020. But what they don't say is that, like, that's a warning, and like hindsight never works until it's too late. Foreshadowing never works until hindsight. So all I can do is kind of just take, that's all any of us can do, take like what I've lived through and try to be of service. Like I was talking about, it's a fine line, but just between being like, okay, what can I actually do to be part of the solution and be the best person I can be, and just being like looking like a crazy unhinged maniac who's just like, oh, screw the government, they're trying to kill us, which they in fact are. um like, jury is in, it's been proven. I've had doctors before, like personal doctors, that have gone to jail and done like federal prison time for excessive prescription writing. A lot of doctors went to jail. A lot of people lost their lives, and families were damaged. And that's just the opioid epidemic. So, like, the biggest drug pusher in the world as an entity is the U.S. government, in my humble opinion. But so, story time. I didn't know what all the fuss was about. Like I said, I was early enough and still naive, and just I didn't know what I didn't know. I was early enough in my addiction to where I thought that stimulants were more of like my drug of choice, because they were at the time. And I didn't know what all the fuss was about. So finally, I had met people who were like, "Oh, you don't like doing pills. You don't like getting, like, catching a pill buzz." And I was like, "No, I end up throwing up. I get nauseous. I don't really feel much. Then I throw up, and then I go to sleep. And I don't really want to pay extra for any of those things." And they were like, "Oh, I got you." Um, this ended up being a future ex of mine. And so one day he gets me Percocet 10s. And I had only ever done Loratabs before, like abused like Loratabs. And I didn't really know the difference between Percocet and Loratabs until after this evening. And what the difference is one is, I'm pretty sure, I can't be 100% on this, but I'm pretty sure, to my understanding, that one of them is hydrocodone, one of them is oxycodone. Oxycodone is stronger. It's more potent. And Percocet 10s ended up being my favorite junk peel, my favorite cheap peel, because they had different milligrams. They had the 7.5s, they had 5 milligrams, but obviously 10 was the best because it was more. So it was these gigantic yellow pills that had a shit ton of Tylenol and 10 milligrams of like the good shit, the hillbilly heroin, the oxy. And over the course of like an hour and a half or so, I took these pills. It takes a long time because I didn't want to just swallow them down. I wanted to chew them up. I busted them up and like sniffed them, but of course then it was really disgusting. It gets gunky in your nose. It like really screws with your sinuses. But I ended up finally like catching this buzz, and I took them all, and I didn't realize I had like, it's like it hit me all at once. And the way I had done them over time, you know, it just took a while to like really hit me. And I didn't know what to expect because I hadn't experienced, I hadn't done ever fooled with cheap pills. I hadn't done enough to know what I was talking about. Like I said, I didn't enjoy it. And this time, like, I took a lot of them. I made like this conscious decision to party on cheap pills, see what all the rage was about, what all the fuss was about. And I was driving down the road back to my parents' house. I was on probation. I had failed epically in life, my first of many failures. I had quit college, caught felony charges, been exposed as someone who had a drug problem, and was on probation. And like I said, I was a college dropout. So, and now I was living back with my parents. Um, I was driving home with these pills in my system, and all of a sudden, it's like I felt good, but I was literally like taken aback, like smacked with pleasure. And what it feels like, an opiate high, heroin high, a hillbilly heroin high, however you do it, what an opiate high feels like. I have a hair, it's like tickling my face. I didn't notice when I made this video, like my hair looks pretty greasy, so ignore. I didn't know what it felt like to really like experience a gradual opiate high, this gradual sense of euphoria that then all of a sudden like just inundates your psyche. And with stimulants, it's so different because it's so extreme. You just go from like 0 to 100, no matter how they're administered or what the stimulant is. It's like cranking the volume up to max, but it was like a slow dial up to this feeling of just like intense euphoria, and you just feel great. Like, how do you describe like the relaxation after a full body massage, or just like the joy of like taking that first bite of like your favorite meal, or just waking up feeling rested, like after a great night's sleep? How do you describe that in an accurate way? Um, it was just like your body feels relaxed, but more than that, your mind feels relaxed. And, and it's just so different. It's just like the pleasure receptors. It's different than, like I said, pot too. Like pot, it can go either way. It's like you just feel so altered. And with alcohol, I always felt so altered, but with Oxy or with Percocets, it was like a functioning euphoria. And I was like, oh my God. And I was driving when it hit me. And it was just this immense pleasure and joy that felt like it coated my soul, which it does. And then when I got home, I tried to eat a grilled cheese sandwich, and I kept like nodding out. And that was the first time I had ever consciously experienced a nod, which was also wonderful. It's like, God, I am just so comfortable and content. And my mind was content. It was like mind and body and soul. And, that was the start of my, the second time I got strung out. And when you think about the sneaky thing about addiction is that your mind for so long, it doesn't really for me now because it's been 5 years. But until this moment in life, every time in the past when I would think about getting high before I was really able to get sober for this final time, it's like your mind in addiction, it goes back to those amazing feelings, and it doesn't take into account the total destruction that it will have on your life. It feels so good. My friend said, oh, it was so good, I almost died, because I asked him like what the high was like when he did heroin. He said, oh, it was great. It was so good, I almost died. And then a couple months later, he did die from an overdose. He had 2 back-to-back overdoses, and the second one was fatal. And I've mentioned him before. He was Eric. He was the first person I ever knew personally who lost their life to addiction, to an overdose. He was like the first of many. And you know, when you're now looking back, I know like, oh, that was the first night of my true relapse. I had dabbled before, but I was kind of like balancing and functioning. I wasn't like full blown off the rails addicted like I was when I ended up getting arrested and ultimately getting put on probation. I was on pretrial probation for a year. It was a year going through the court system. And then finally, when I took my first plea to a felony charge and was like officially a felon on probation for 3 years. So, I had been functioning for a while and I wasn't using for a while. And then I was kind of just dabbling, take it or leave it. But that first night of doing Percocets, about 7 of them for myself and really understanding like that opiate high and what all the fuss was about and was like, man, this is something I want to feel again. Um, that was the start of like my second bender, which ended up lasting about a year and a half, a year and a half or so before I was ultimately arrested again, obviously violated my probation and had new felony charges pending. So, I look back on that night and I tell this story to be like, to explain, it's kind of like I look back on that moment in time and time, throughout any period of my addiction of 13 years. I look back and I just kind of go back to like, knowing the enemy and it was they say in recovery that you relapse before you relapse, and that's true. And what they mean is that it's in your head because you have to know that you are the enemy and you are the savior. You have potential to be both because we all are both, and we have to be our own saviors. We do. We have to be like the second coming. I think the second coming isn't going to be biblical. I know a lot of people would disagree, but I don't think it's going to be like a biblical, this, sky opens up. I don't think it's going to come from the top down, literally. I think it's going to come from the inside out. We have to be the second coming, and we have to do our part to be that second coming. If it's going to come, and all we can do is either be part of the solution, the second coming, the new earth, or just toe the line with this hell on earth that these corporations have created and are increasingly tightening the reins to monopolize us through fear and then ultimately like control. They've only been talking about like one world government and new world order since at least the 80s, openly talking about it, and Biden just mentioned it again. um and so like with the opioid epidemic, like those were prescription pills. Who in the world, what pharmacy, what doctor, what psychiatrist, what company, who in the world would not know that hillbilly heroin, you know, um, like cheap pills, Oxycontin? No, I do not believe that any doctor believed truly that it was not as addictive, not habit forming, that it was actually a viable solution for pain management. I didn't know. None of us know what we don't know. I didn't know what. I just didn't know how bad it was going to get, of course. But when that first time that I did pills, I knew like they were something special. I knew that. And we didn't know it was like ground zero for the opioid epidemic, you know. But what that really means now that we can know, that we do know, we can look back on it. What that really means is that, the government works hand in hand with these doctors to break the Hippocratic oath, to do, to break the oath to do no harm, and to just get an entire generation screwed, if they live through it at all, just to ruin families and to absolutely like just decimate these dying small mountain towns that don't have the voice to speak up, and people that are going to turn to drug use, drug abuse, excessive drug use are oftentimes people who don't have the voice in a social way to speak up, because they are the impoverished, the working class, people that don't have the means to have their problems fixed, or to have their legal problems swept under the rug, to have their voice heard, and, you know, 15 years ago, it was the pills and Oxy and hillbilly heroin. Maybe I'll tell. I had, it was like a religious experience the first time I ever did an Oxy 80, which was, of course, not that long, a couple months after I'd done, gotten high off of cheap pills for the first time. So, and this wasn't, the opioid epidemic. This wasn't the first time that the government, I mean, look what they did with crack in the hood. I do not believe, being someone who barely got out of addiction with my life, being from an area that was hit with the opioid epidemic, I do not believe that the crack epidemic in the hood in the 80s was like an organic problem. I don't, because the government fixes what they want to fix, and they exacerbate what they want to exacerbate, so it's like, man, when I look back on that time, it's just, my heart breaks, for myself and for everyone still struggling, and for the communities and the families. And it's just, I feel like, as citizens, we have, the enemy is like on all sides. The enemy is going to be the corporations that are going to turn a blind eye at best, or exacerbate and be like, oh, here's some poison, don't worry, it'll be fine. They are the enemy. All we can do is like not be an enemy to ourselves, and my heart breaks for like just how lost I was when I look back, and I'm like, man, I just was so willing to do anything to like feel okay, and to feel like I had a place in the world, because I was so screwed up, and I just didn't know how to fix myself. And I didn't know, like, it comes from a place of autonomy and self-love, of course, and self-acceptance, but also, you have to have that autonomy to have the self-love. It all goes hand in hand. And I just didn't think like, hey, this is my life, and that actually means something, um so that's what, I just wanted to share that. And it kind of ties in, like I said, with like some of like the bigger thing that are going on in the world. But anyway, y'all have a good night.